we have 4 panelists. We have Mike and Naveen join again. And we have Sean, Director of Enterprise IAM Strategy from Royal Bank of Canada. We also have Amaar, Digital Identity Security Consulting Manager from Accenture, join our discussion. To start our panel, let's do a quick self-introduction. Sean, you want to start?
Sure. Thank you, Bryan. It's great to be here. I'm Sean Kennedy. I'm the Director of Enterprise Identity and Access Management Strategy at RBC. And I just wanted to say very interesting presentations, and I can see how we can put both of these two ideas together or thoughts together to have an interesting discussion this evening.
All right. Thank you very much, Sean. Amaar, you want to say a few words?
Thanks, Bryan, and thanks for having me here tonight. My name is Amaar Malik. I'm a manager at Accenture focusing on digital identity, and we help our clients implement identity security solutions. And been in the industry for a number of years, and also more recently getting involved in a lot of cloud security. So I'm really happy to be here with some ex-colleagues and some esteemed colleagues, and looking forward to the discussion today.
All right, thank you, Amaar. Since you mentioned ex-colleagues, so I guess that's a Naveen, right? So Naveen, can you do not your official introduction, but your own story?
Thanks, Bryan. I think you've given me a good introduction, so I can self-introduce myself. I'm Naveen Thoddil. I am a senior cloud solution architect here at Microsoft, focusing just on identity today. I've been in identity industry for about 15 years, working on from a traditional firm base to today with more modern cloud solutions. I'm happy to be here. I would like to hear more views and perspective from my colleagues who have worked previously with me, and also some new faces over here as well.
Excellent. Okay, and last but not least, Mike, you have a very interesting hat, and some people comment on your hat already. So tell us a little bit something about yourself.
Sure, thanks, Bryan. I've been in the industry for security and identity for 25 years or so, a long time with IBM, where I started wearing this hat just to help people pick me out of the vast multitudes that are IBM for various reasons. But I've done a lot of different things, from coding J2E apps all the way to international deployment solution architecture to adversarial research against facial recognition. So it's a wide spectrum there that I've interacted with in my career. Thanks for having me.
All right, cool. Okay, so let's start our panel discussion. And in the meantime, I really encourage you to submit your questions and comment through chat or Q&A. All right, so my first question, since today's topic is about the future of identity, sounds like a big name. So let's understand a little bit better about currently what role is identity playing in cybersecurity, how important it is. I like to hear, although yes, people talk about it's very important, but I want to hear your insight there. Let's start with actually Amaar first.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Bryan. I think that's a really important question to open this discussion, this panel discussion on. I think identity has been one of the key pillars of cybersecurity since cybersecurity was even a term, right? And if you look at the past big breaches that have happened in the past 5 years, I think if you do a deep dive analysis and a post-mortem analysis on that, you will most likely find that that data breach, or that hack or that attack occurred because there was a deficiency or a failure in an identity security control, right? So in other words, it's very, very important to stop these breaches from happening. Traditionally within cybersecurity, if we look at cybersecurity broader, identity was one pillar, but nowadays identity data is being embedded in the various cybersecurity domains we have, such as data, network, vulnerability assessment, threat management. So identity data is actually being embedded in all of these pillars. And I'm sure we'll get to zero trust and some of those other fancy frameworks that are out there, but identity is really solidified its place within cybersecurity, right? And traditionally, we've seen identity as an access model that's been typically controlled or managed by the network layer, right? So if a user was able to authenticate via VPN or when they're within the four walls of their organization, a company can have high assurance that that user is who they say they are, right? But I think as we're moving into the cloud, as there's more remote workforce because of COVID, that network boundary is becoming dissolved, right? And those lines are becoming blurred. So we can no longer really trust the network or for more tactically speaking, a user connecting to corporate assets through VPN. And so we need to shift that to another control, right? And identity is one of those strong controls that we can rely on. And so coming back to your question, I think identity in the modern enterprise, this is really the foundation of security, right? And identity solutions, if they're implemented correctly, they can help organizations ensure that the right people have access to the right resources at the right time and within the right context. And all of that needs to be verified continuously and periodically, right? And so I think that verification and that continuous verification is the key aspect there that I do want to get into, but I'll save my comments for later on a bit. And so, if we see identity being in the heart of the modern enterprise, there's a lot of other cybersecurity solutions that are within that ecosystem, right? So, for example, you have the SIM solution. You have like network devices that are relying on IGA and identity solutions for authentication, like TACACS and things like that. And then also you have HR systems that are also connected to your suite of identity tools, helping with joiner, mover, leaver use cases, right? So I think more and more, because of these reasons I mentioned, identity has really solidified itself as one of the strongest lines of defense within cybersecurity.
Very good. So like what you said, identity on one side is a foundation, on the other side it become more and more kind of a industry move from network centric, more moving towards kind of like identity centric. Sean, what do you see there?
Yeah, I'm going to echo Amar's sentiment there. And one thing that we really had to recognize once COVID started and everybody started moving and working from home was how are we going to make the ease of transition so that that was a possibility for the employees of an organization. You didn't want to lose any productivity, but at the same time, you had to support employees in their ability to work from home. And, I've been in identity and, in technology for quite a long time. And I remember the days where you were okay to just provision a user here or there for one or two applications because that's all they needed access to. And no one did anything unless they were actually in the office. So this major boom in moving people to be more remote definitely dissolved that, layer where it's like, okay, network access and firewall rules are all you really need to prevent people from getting into your key critical systems. And putting identity at the forefront now, you recognize that every single user's access to your corporation and all of its applications is, just that critical in order to make sure that, you're not making the news for some of the breaches and statistics that Naveen was pointing out during his presentation.
Yeah, definitely. And the COVID-19 pandemic has really accelerated the identity journey, and a lot of many people work from home, hybrid workplace environment, so which really make the identity become the central topic. Anyway, Mike or Naveen want to jump in?
I would just say, unless you want to go, Naveen, I would say that everything my colleagues have said is completely true, obviously. It's a moment for identity. It has the board's attention like it never has before. I think the role it's playing is increased in significance in that sense, but also the definition of identity is changing. It's no longer just a human in the office, as Sean points out, right? It's a whole spectrum of the IoT and bots and RPA, and even with humans. What does that mean? Is it behavior? How much behavior do you account for, right? Can you always count them being on the same device. That's part of identity. Behavior, the more data that we have in society as a whole means that enterprises can use that data to have a deeper identity profile than they did before. That should lead to better security, hopefully, without, but there are some privacy concerns as well.
Excellent. And yeah, you mentioned the definition of identity, the scope of it. And I think some people online already comment on that one. Louis comment on how identity apply to IoT device. Those are bot and non-human devices. Those are things you actually touched on that one. So make identity not just, okay, your user ID, right? So that's a totally bigger scope. And Naveen, what any insights there?
I acknowledge every statement that each of my colleagues have stated. From what I've seen is, for me, identity is an enabler to cybersecurity hygiene, right? No matter what cybersecurity solutions you have in the market, the telemetries that you collect today, they're all paired against identities. It doesn't need to be user identity. It could be machine identity. It could be workload identity. You name it, right? All your telemetry still needs to be grouped together against some entity inside your organization. And you're more normal than not, you're going to map that against identity. So having the right visibility into how the identity moves across your landscape is very critical for the cybersecurity to basically have, do their job. The SecOps needs to know what's happening in the landscape, especially when the organization is having evolving digital estates today, from on-premise to cloud, for example. They need to have a single pane of glass to see how these telemetries gets mapped to identity. So I think an identity is an enabler, as well as I second all the other thoughts that the colleagues have put together.
All right. So enabler, especially for when we move to like a Naveen said, like moving the cloud age, more and more like doing the cloud migration, digital transformation. Some people are commenting online right now, like Sam mentioned, like how do we do IAM in the cloud? We work for the startup company. How do we kind of enable identity? So we touch on that one very soon. So before we jump to those different areas, I also want to ask our panel another question is, what do you see some major challenges in the identity security, right? So we talk about identity, but what kind of major problems people normally see, right? So those are the targets we need to solve. So what do you see the challenges? Sean, you want to give a first shot?
Sure. That's definitely something that in my role coming up with strategy is forefront in my thoughts. One of the things that we definitely have to look at, and depends on the size of your organization, obviously, but I mentioned earlier in my comments that people used to have access to 1 or 2 applications, and now in order to do your job, you're usually signing into 10, 12, 15, 20 different systems a day just in order to get your job done. The journey that I see and the challenge that I see is that all of these things may not be using a enterprise type of an identity, and you have different usernames, different passwords stored for each of these. I love the concept and the strategy of moving towards passwordless, but in some cases you're sort of looking at trying to take a dump truck full of applications and figure out how do you prioritize this work in order to move it into that more modern and more secure, for the most part, methodologies and technology. So that's, for us, it's about making sure that you have a solid foundation, understanding exactly where you stand, and plotting the course very carefully to make sure that you're not interrupting the business, because that's cyber security people, we know that we're often the ones that get a finger pointed at us if we're making recommendations that could cause any type of disruption in users' activity. So,
excellent. And Sean, Mike, you want to add on that?
Sure. I think that along with I will say the really, really common traditional challenges, right? Securing resources and making sure there's not extraneous access and all these, which are a challenge enough. I think that what we're seeing culturally is a blending of identities. You've got your work identity and you've got your personal identity. And I think these worlds are colliding in new ways. And so that's more and more clients I talk to, the more I'm starting to see that. For instance, there's a survey that came out a week or two ago. I can't remember who did it, but it cited that people of the two latest generations, labeled however you want to label them, are a lot more likely to use their work email for third-party apps, third-party social login kind of situations. I can understand that on one level, because if you think about it, enterprise spam detection is way better than, you know, Yahoo used to be or whoever else. But that's a huge threat, right? Because now that email, while it seems innocuous, now is a phishing target. And so there are complications there where if they're being phished, the same younger generations are also more likely to click on links just by default, maybe because their mobile environment. I don't know, but there are these fascinating changes that are shaking the assumptions we once made about what makes up an identity for the enterprise.
Excellent. So not just within the enterprise, but also expand that one into your personal life, because we all need the identity to verify, to access things. All right, cool. Naveen?
Yeah, I think you know, there are different challenges for different organizations that I've seen. But as the organizations evolve, the biggest challenge today they have is a fragmented identity landscape, right? The organizations have evolved. They had mergers and acquisitions. As Sean pointed out, they have 15 applications. Each application, you know, can be grouped against single IDP or multiple IDP. So the common challenges that I hear today when I speak to most of my customers is, I have a fragmented landscape. How do I converge it? These are all good. We can provide you a solution. Now, what's the business gator here, or the restriction that we have is, with all these solutions, there have been processes that are built along with these. And when you start looking into the solutioning of moving into cloud, you want to start having something that has worked for you to be transformed into the cloud, but also you want to look and relook on things that or optimize your processes that has never worked or that shouldn't be being used when you take your journey to cloud. So industries or the organizations are trying to figure that out, of both fragmented identities and the business processes, because changing processes is not something that business would accept and would have a lot of restrictions around that. So finding that right balance is key, and stopping and rethinking about your decision in optimizing your process and just following the best practice. And also for all the organizations, what I advocate is, you know, this is the right time as you transform into cloud, you need to start relooking at your processes as well. So identity challenges can just not be from a technology front, but can also be from a processes front.
Very good. Very excellent point there. And Amaar, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I agree with Naveen there, right? And I think before we get into the cloud discussion, just on talking about the traditional on-premises environment, what we've seen as a big challenge when we talk to our customers is basically siloed user directories for applications, right? And what happens is, you know, you have developers pushing out applications into the environment, but those applications essentially live on an island by themselves, right? So the actual login and the access mechanism for those applications is local to the application itself, right? So what that results in is that that's a missed opportunity if you really think about it from an identity analytics perspective, because we're unable to see, you know, what are those telemetry and those data points of that application. Not only that, but also you're unable to consistently apply domain policies, right? So you have a bunch of different islands of applications that are, you know, locally authenticating, and it becomes very difficult to build that visibility layer on top of those apps, right? And then ultimately you end up with help desk tickets and manually, you know, provisioning and deprovisioning users into those apps, which of course results in which can also be impeded by human error and high operational costs. So that's kind of on the traditional landscape on the on-prem. In the cloud, what we've been seeing recently is entitlement management and permission sprawl, right? And what that effectively means is that more people are just getting more access, and it's becoming very difficult to track all of those permissions and entitlements, right? It's literally a permissions boom or entitlement boom. And so, especially if you talk about a cloud resource like an EC2 instance or S3 bucket, you can get very finite and granular in terms of the permissions that human identities as well as non-human identities that are using to access or manipulate that resource. And so, just having that permission sprawl, it's a whole challenge on its own. And identities have actually skyrocketed within cloud, right? Because you have a lot of automation and DevOps processes, and all of those DevOps processes, they need their own identities, right? And so that's where we get into the discussion about secrets management and how do we provide access to those identities in a just-in-time manner. So like the solution that we've been kind of exploring recently is along the lines of cloud entitlement management, and that is discover, right? So discover all of your identities out there, strive for the least privilege, right? So continuously strive to cut down access where it's not needed, and then monitor that access on a continuous basis, right? So that's kind of a new challenge that we're coming across. And then of course you'll always have from a governance perspective, right? From an IAM program standpoint, there isn't enough documentation, there isn't standards or policies to dictate how access patterns are implemented. And that just leads to inability to govern and enforce access consistently across the organization.
Very good. Yeah. So you mentioned on-premise and also on the cloud, and also from governance point of view. So those are challenges. So it seems like what we talked about so far, identity is very important, become a centric of not only cybersecurity, but also your IT or cloud. But on the other side, we do have quite many different areas of challenges with identity security. And also identity, people kind of are using different terms to describe identity, right? So we have a typical IAM, identity and access management. We also have a privileged access management. So we have a IGA, identity governance and administration. We have a SIAM, customer identity and access management. So a lot of terminologies there. At the end of the day, how can we put together a sound identity strategy, also considering all those different areas? So putting them together, especially for company kind of, there are two, of course, different flavor of that. For company already have identity program, or some newer company just start there. So I'd like to hear from panel, what's your thought about identity strategy? And I know there are two people in this panel carry the strategy related titles. We have a strategist, we have a IAM strategy. And let's start with the strategist first. Mike, can you share some insights?
Sure. I mean, I think what it boils down to is that often the approach can be slapdash and segmented and fragmented. You acquire an IGA, you have network security probably already. You get some privileged access management. You have some strong authentication or MFA. The idea that these are all fragmented operations already kind of hamper the approach. I would say that kind of what we've already been saying is that if identity is the key, then you're going to need one of multiple things, either a centralization of identity information into some kind of warehouse or data lake, or something that takes in information and does some analytics on it, or some ML. That there are issues with that, right? And or what you also may need is some kind of standard method for breaking down those boundaries. I'm a huge proponent for things like shared signals, which is a new standard coming out that basically advertises or broadcasts security events between these systems, often related to identity, right? This account, this identity is compromised. So therefore, everyone else needs to take action. Having these pools of identity are what you have to avoid, and there are ways to do that. And often you don't get to do it from the ground up, unfortunately. So you're working to backfill and color that coordination over time.
All right. Okay. Sean, you want to continue what Mike's comment?
Sure. You know, it definitely is a large problem to tackle, trying to come up with a strategy. And in most cases, like Mike said, you're coming into a situation where, you know, it's a piece of this and a little bit of that and another control here and a control there that were implemented at the time where that was a critical piece. That we need to do PAM, we need to do identity access certifications, we need to do access controls on this, and we need to implement MFA, but it wasn't necessarily all tied together. You know, being in a position where you're looking at a strategy overall for your organization, it's about looking at each one of these components, the level of maturity that you have for each one of them, and then trying to figure out where the gaps are, what you need to do. In some cases, you know, like it or not, you may have to scrap what you had because it may not have been put in with the bigger picture in mind. You know, and it's all about making sure that the bigger picture is there. What's the future look like? You know, once we start, you know, Mike mentioned getting into analytics and user behaviors, making sure that all of that plays a piece of it. How do you look at what you have and then draw your roadmap from there to say, these are the gaps that we've identified. Here's where we're going to prioritize, where we're going to mature, change directions, and incorporate everything so that you have a holistic view of what your identity, you know, environment should look like going forward. But I would say, you know, you definitely need to have an understanding of where you are and prioritize where you need to put your efforts so that you can get to that longer term journey. And you know, longer term, honestly, we're looking 4 or 5 years out, and at that point, we're still, you know, seeing things where we can definitely look at the latest technologies and move to things like passwordless. But you know, you have to give yourself time. It's not going to happen overnight.
Very good. Since you also mentioned the passwordless, let's continue. Naveen, what do you see on the strategy side?
So I always think that one single strategy never fits all organizations, and one single solution never fits all organizations, right? This is all based on my experience in the field. The things that we need to look in from a strategical perspective is, as Sean said, is, you know, nothing can be changed overnight. You know, everything needs to be looked in from a perspective of what is the priority to the organization, what is the priority to the business, right? And although we need to set a framework of what our end goal looks like, we still need to have these transactional goals that we need to achieve to ensure that the business is having a frictionless journey in their day-to-day activities. Now, if I basically look into a strategic perspective, when I speak to my customers, the 3 normal things that they constantly speak about. One is the business outcome. When we say business outcome, we are looking at what's currently working and what isn't working, right? We don't want to touch the things that are working today, but we are trying to optimize things that doesn't work today, right? Operations that take significantly long time, operations that take significantly, have significant dependencies on multiple users within the organization, right? At the end of the day, IAM platform is an orchestration of processes, right? If we can understand, at the end of the day, users' processes are automated. That's what an IAM solution is meant to be doing at a very high level, right? So business outcome is the first thing. Organizations have moved like basically, 5 or 8 years back, enterprise users experience was not a challenge because they're meant to do a job and they have their time to basically have their password resets. Today productivity is being looked very carefully. The user experiences are being looked very, as a top consideration to most organizations. It's no more that IAM is a platform where we need to look into experience and IAM is a platform where we need to look into security. It needs to be balanced out. So you need to balance out the right experience as you think forward. And the last thing I normally see is from a security posture perspective, when you define an IAM solution, you need to see where the organization is today in their journey, right? They have different landscape, different business criteria that they need to support and address to. But at the same time, They don't want to compromise the security posture. They want to be forward thinking. They want to see how the market is evolving. They want to adopt new solution and strategy. And the right way of doing it is basically doing an assessment on each of these three platforms specifically, right? Each of them have different, different goals, objectives, from access to privilege to governance to CIAM, all have different priorities, right? Understanding the right priority, but making sure that they all form within your roadmap is key for the success of the organization when they define the strategy.
Excellent. And it's specifically, you mentioned the business, and not only just the business itself, but also the customers, right? So the customer, business, the users. So not just from technology side, but also from the business side. All right, cool. And Amaar, anything you want to add to those strategies, mate?
Yeah, so we do a lot of we help a lot of our clients define the IAM strategy, and if an organization decides to revamp their identity strategy, you best believe that there's going to be a lot of stakeholders that have eyes on this, right? So it's not only the technology folks, but you're going to have even marketing or HR or business is definitely going to get involved in it, right? So we're if an organization decides to do it, I mean, it's good, but it's an opportunity for them to balance those two things, right? The risk mitigation, but also the user experience, right? So we have very well-defined frameworks that we've developed through our interactions with a lot of clients, right? So for banking, for example, we have a specific framework that we use to assess the current capabilities that an organization has. And then I think the key message that I want to give here is that it has to be tied back to the business goals, right? So even within banking, for example, there's going to be certain objectives that the business is looking for that would naturally prioritize themselves over other initiatives, right? So the recommendations and kind of those initiatives that we put on the roadmap, those definitely need to be tied back to the organization's overall goals. And one lesson learned from the field that I would like to share is that I think oftentimes people forget about the program level and the actual operating model of identity, and they look at it as a technology solution that needs to be solved, right? But in terms of, I think it's a point to be made that establishing that program governance and ensuring that the right accountability and decision-making processes are there, I think that's one of the fundamental success criteria of a good IAM strategy.
Very good. And you mentioned the program, right? So the program, it's a journey. And I think one of the introduction I think I put there for Mike is Mike always think security is a journey, not just a destination, right? So it's not like you buy something done, we job finished. It's continuously improve on that one. All right. Speaking after we finish the talk on the strategy side, let's talk a little bit on technology side. Although we all know we cannot just only think about technology because there's a business, there's a process, people side, but technology itself is very, very important, right? So it may change the whole landscape or maybe change the direction the industry is going. So what do you see the technology, or how can we better leverage the emerging or latest technologies? Some of them may not be that new anymore for something like a cloud, AI, ML, big data, data lake, or whatever. I saw people putting some terms on there. So how would those technology impact identity security, and how do we kind of handle that? I will ask Naveen first, since you carried architect role there.
So it's one of those questions, all the IAM platform today is racing to adopt all these technologies, right? So let's take, for example, Azure Active Directory today. We get 30 billion authentication requests to our platform globally. And that is a lot of data, and that's a lot of telemetries that we have. Previously, you have a bunch of these data elements and you write policies and rules to basically selectively take some rules to apply to your access decisions and governance decisions. Today, you're talking in mammoth scales, right? And it's not something that you can basically run using certain lines or rules or policies. And this is where we are seeing that machine learning models are basically taking over and understanding the patterns of user behavior analytics in making decisions for access level decision making for users to be authenticated as well. I've seen, the evolution of technology has been considerably now being leveraged by most of the platform, not just specifically to the access side of things. I've seen that it's enabling the business and especially users who have spent a ton of time basically doing role mining to certify the users. Today, you have confidence score that basically is enabled by technology to give the reviewers certain level of confidence to say that, okay, I can now review my access because I see that I have a technology in place that gives me kind of a confidence score for a user rather than just rubber stamping it, right? We have solutions in place that really captures real-time threats and basically reports that back to the IAM. It basically goes back to the concept that Amaar was speaking about, continuous access evaluations, right? All these cannot be done if the technology is not forefronting that, right? At the end of the day, the backbone of all these solutions can only be enabled or can be automated with such a level of data that we receive into our platforms today, just by leveraging the right technology. Either it's, cloud is no more a normal, it's a normal thing, right? It's no more considered something that is modern. Cloud exists in all the organizations today. AI, ML is coming up big time, but I think it's been leveraged by most of the IAM platforms today for access decision. So.
Very cool. Anyone else want to share?
I mean, go ahead, Sean.
Go ahead, Mike.
No, after you.
So yeah, what I was going to say is that definitely looking at the volume of data and the number of transactions, everything that we do is now digital, and having a clear picture of what is actually happening within your environment is key, to the point where you sophisticated attackers are actually trying to learn and defeat the machine learning that's being put in place to depict and develop and find that unusual behavior. They're programming their attacks so that it falls in a certain frequency that may not be picked up by some of the services that you have deployed. So realistically, because of the volume of data that we are now looking at, there's no choice but to take on these latest technologies, incorporating AI and machine learning to understand the volume of entitlements that users have. We need to make sure that, is there a picture that we can paint by using these tools, as opposed to having individuals try and go through this crazy amount of data and see what's actually happening. And based on that volume of data, not many organizations have that sitting in their data center. So you start moving those services to the cloud where you can burst your capacity as needed. So I think they all play an important role in working together to help you on your journey, both from an enterprise perspective as well as the customer side. From the customer perspective, you can start using these technologies to start painting a better picture of how to better serve your customers, right? So if you see them doing certain transactions, you can identify where there's a need or they're looking for something that would help them. All of this stuff plays together. That's more on the business side of it, but the technologies are there for us to do that with that information.
Very cool. Mike, you want to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, as Naveen said, right, this is kind of table stakes. You watch the RSA themes from the past decade. We need all the data. And then a couple of years later, it's now we're doing things with the data. So we've kind of moved past that on some level, right? I think the goal here is to cut through, no offense to my marketing friends, but the marketing language and figure out, as Sean was hinting at, what concrete use case are we solving with this ML? And how do we show that to the board? Also important is how it fits within your human culture. You need transparency and accountability, right? You don't want your people going, well, the machines told me to cut off the access, so I'm going to cut. The ideal ML scenario makes decisions and then explains them in ways humans can use them. It's like when my 3-year-old comes up to me on the playground and says, why are bubbles round? I could go and teach him high order calculus and do surface tension and all this business, but he's not going to remember jack out of that, right? So instead, I talk about how water has friends, other bits of water, and they like to be together. And the way they can be together is making a bubble shape. I haven't lied about service tension, but now he's got stuff he could use. We have to be able to explain these decisions in the same way to our end users. This confidence score was this because this is unusual login, or this confidence score is we're going to approve this automatically, this access, because everybody in the department has this and he's not unusual. What that does is it gives them, empowers humans to learn and retains them being accountable. The easiest example is, how many phone numbers did you have memorized before you got a mobile device? Probably had like 20, 30, because I'm old and I had that for a long time. Once I got a mobile device, I started forgetting it, right? It was 30, then it was 15, then it was 10, then it was 1, maybe my wife's number. I've ceded control to my mobile device, and that transparency is key to keeping that accountability in the equation. So you get the best of human learning and machine learning. So it's concrete examples, concrete goals, speed and scale, like Sean said, and then use it wisely.
Very cool. I love your examples. That's really also really tell the story.
It's most of my children. Usually they're about my children. So,
Yeah, so after I also found after I moved to get this Apple phone, I really remember a lot of names. That means that the phone numbers, just one place, always looking for that. Amaar, you want to share any insights there?
Yeah, I mean, I think my colleagues have covered it pretty well here, and a lot of our partners actually are doing a lot of work within artificial intelligence and machine learning and some of our software vendors. But I think the key point that I want to highlight is that AI and ML, whenever it comes to fruition and it gets more advanced and more used within the industry, I think it's going to be a tool and it's not going to replace some of those decisions that humans are going to make, right? So it's all about, I think, increasing, like my colleague said, the confidence in the access review and basically supplement and augmenting some of the tools that we already have, right? I think traditionally the access policies are very rigid in terms of if then statements. But I think with the use of AI and ML, we can further build that context and really enable conditional access, for example, right? And you can get into some pretty interesting use cases like suspicious logins or logins from various geographic boundaries and things like that. So yeah, that's my message there, is that once we start relying more on AI and ML, I think it's going to be another tool in our toolbox to further be more precise in access decision-making processes.
That's very true, right? So that's really is a more advanced level, more granular level, right? So it's not just a general pace. Okay, good. We actually coming to almost the end of our panel discussion. We still have 2 more questions. Considering the time, I'd like to ask our panel members to give, for each question, just to give a very short answer and maybe within 30 seconds. So since the topic for today's session is the future of identity security. So what is the future you can see, right? So maybe in 6 months, maybe a year, 2 years, I don't know, 5 years or 10 years, but maybe too far. But what do you see the future about identity? Where is the industry is moving toward? So for that one, I'd like to ask everyone just maybe within 30 seconds, what's your prediction? Who want to give the first shot?
I'll go first. What I would say is that definitely moving and removing passwords from the ecosystem is always going to be a #1 trend. And then second to that, I would say that we're going to start seeing a lot more of, we'll call it machine type DNA, where machines themselves are going to be able to be identified based on characteristics and attributes, and tying those things together so that you do have a solid security foundation for both users and for system-to-system type access.
All right, passwordless and machine DNA. All right, anyone?
Yeah, I think for me, like the utopia or the vision of identity security in the future is it hasn't really changed, I would say. Like we're still trying to move towards this place where There's frictionless experience for the user, but at the same time, as operators or owners of the program, we have that visibility, that continuous verification, right? So from an end user standpoint, again, the target state or the utopia is that we have very efficient onboarding, so users can quickly be onboarded with data that we've collected. But at the same time, that's supported by security features such as biometric and passwordless authentication. And then we're able to re-verify and validate the users and regain that assurance of the user's access throughout their life cycle, right? So that's what I would explain as kind of the target vision for identity security.
The ideal world, the state, right? So the better state. Okay, Mike, anything you want to say then? Oh, you.
I think the easiest way to predict a lot of stuff and what's coming, in my experience, is to look at consumer. If it's in consumer and the consumer experience, it's coming to enterprise. So for me, my bold prediction would be that ease of use is going to be predominant, right? The easier you channel people into good paths, the better. And that saves you a lot of headaches on the tail end. And more controversially, I will actually say that I think identity and the future of it is going to be mobile centric. That mobile devices are the pockets of the next decade. It will be everything. And the one thing it hasn't quite yet been is identity, but I think it's coming in a strong way, and we're going to have to account for that.
All right. Okay. User experience and mobile could be your go-to place. Naveen?
Yeah, I just second all our colleagues. I think the current trends, if you look alike, for me, is passwordless is the biggest adoption factor. Security and user experience comes with passwordless. The second thing I'm seeing in the industry is continuous access evaluation, because your identity is in cloud. If it's compromised, I need to be notified immediately, right? And that's like through the continuous access evaluation solution that's been baked in. I'm seeing a lot of decentralized identity coming up, specifically on the CIM space from a privacy perspective. I think it will slowly evolve into enterprise through our Web3 adoption. So these are the current things and future focused things that I'll be looking into.
All right. Don't forget a blockchain. All right, cool. All right, so to wrap up our panel discussion, and so I'd like to ask everyone just to give them another 30 seconds comment on talent development. I know within our group, we always have some people interested to kind of either tap into cybersecurity journey, or like they want to change their career path, or more kind of advance their career. It could be there are some like even your colleagues want to hear your insights because you guys are successful cybersecurity professionals. Your personal success also tell a lot of stories. So if you can only give one advice to other people, so how can you better advance your career? And specifically today in identity field, right? So if you're considering identity security field, how do you better develop yourself, right, to gain the necessary skills or capabilities? I think let's Sean start.
Okay, so for me, to keep it short, I would say that because technology is changing every 5 to 10 seconds, I think it's important to allocate some of your time on a daily basis to keep abreast of trends and things that are going on in the industry. And then once you find something that you're really interested in, start digging deep into it. Find somebody that knows or is a specialist in the space. I personally am one of those people that's more than willing to have a coffee chat with somebody on a particular topic. So find somebody that's willing to do that and carry on a conversation about finding your next path.
Very good. Get a mentor and continue to learn. Right? Amaar, you want to say something?
Yeah, I would say it's an important discussion because there's a gap of skills and talent that we have in the industry. So I think the key, if I had to give one, I mean, there's no silver bullet, but if I had to say one thing, I would say it's the curiosity and drive to learn more. because as you've heard today, there's so many interesting things going on within identity security, and identity security touches a lot of the emerging technologies such as cloud, AI, and blockchain, and some of those other buzzwords. But having that drive and that desire to continuously learn, I think that's one of those key skills and capabilities that we're looking for.
Excellent. All right, Mike?
I'll go with two. One is the ability to convince people of something. Your program will not succeed unless you can capture the board's attention and say, this is important and here's why. A lot of times we focus on the technology to our detriment. And then I just wanted to echo what Amaar has already said, like you're not have to be qualified. You just need to be faithful, available, and teachable. There are so many people in this industry that have been successful that have no business being in security or identity, but that doesn't matter. From medieval monasticist scholars to people who majored in flute performance, doesn't matter your background. There are avenues in that you can find. As Sean said, find what interests you and dive into it.
All right. Tell a story and make yourself interesting. Excellent. Naveen?
Yeah, so I'd like to conclude by, acknowledge all these statements are very valid. I think the basic is understand the standards and protocols, right? If you can learn that, then all the technologies, they are all going standard based today. So if you can understand the protocols and standards and spend some time, at least on a product, seeing how that's been implemented, that's your starting point to drive that conversation. That's a starting point for you to drive that confidence to have that conversation, right? I don't think you need to run around all these products popular in the market and learn yourself. Understand the basics, keep it simple, learn the standards and protocols. Just check with one out of, there's a lot of open source products out there or free versions of software. Just play around with it, and then that gives you the confidence.
Excellent. Back to foundation, right? So besides, there are so many things, so all the terminology, maybe marketing buzzword, all those things. But at the end of the day, you also need to have a very clear foundation, concepts. Just like identity, boil down, you still need to back to subject-object access kind of relationship, right? So to all those things, that will help you in the long run. All right, very good. Thank you very much for all our panel members. Thank you very much for coming to speaking with us.